So anyway, now that I'm done talking, we can see that the robo bay has been built, and the first unit I would almost always recommend getting at a robotics facility is the observer. And the reason for that is because banshees can come a little bit before you'll get this observer out, even if you build it first. So that's why you just need to get it first. And we will see what I use this observer for if I decide to move it this game. I don't know. And the first robo facility that that is finished, I would actually recommend using a chrono boost on, and we can see that right now. The chrono boost is finishing up right now, I think. And the reason for that is because I get a warp prism after the observer, and that's just basically a mobile pylon for the most part, and that's what I use it for. You can delay this warp prism, by the way, no big deal. If you want to try to rush an immortal, I guess that could work. But the reason you use a chrono boost is because one chrono boost, while making an observer and a warp prism, like so, this robo facility will finish. You'll get your robo bay. If you start a observer and warp prism and use one chrono boost on it, by the time those two units are done, this robo bay will be finished. So you can just immediately start making Colossus. And we can see right now 2 Colossus are on the way, and my gateway ball is still pretty small. I would recommend probably more than 3 sentries, but if they have decent energy, which these don't, then you can get away with just 3 sentries. And we can see I'm adding on 2 gateways. So this is going to be your production, and this is actually going to be everything you want until you get an expansion started. And that is 5 warp gates and 2 robos, and which seems like a lot to afford off producing, but off the robos you're going to be making immortals, not Colossus. And we can see just scattered one of my pylons that was behind its third. No big deal there. And my Nexus is starting about the same time as his third, so all shenanigans. And once you get these 2 Colossus out, like a lot of Terran pushes actually happen. Since a lot of people will say Terran's strongest at mid game, blah blah blah. A lot of the pushes happen anywhere from, I mean, we saw that push at 8 minutes, and that's one of the early game pushes, but a lot of them happen like between 10 and maybe even 13 minutes. That's a little bit late, but that's when they can try to push you. And at the same time, if it is coming later, you just gotta watch out for them to like maybe try to distract you at the front and then drop you from the side. So just having good minimap awareness, you will see those sort of drops coming in with these pylons. But my point is, once you have these 2 Colossus out, you can basically defend any of those pushes, and we actually are going to get to see exactly what I'm talking about in a second. So I guess I'll just let this play out here. Sorry. But, so my third base is coming down, and just feel confident once you have these 2 Colossus that you can defend any of these pushes. So I would almost even recommend going and attacking them, because trying to attack them before they can realize like how strong your army actually is can actually benefit you, because you can kill them before they can fully retreat. We can see these armies coming down here. Now obviously when you build pylons everywhere on the minimap, which if you look at it right now you can see they're spreading quite a bit, you will lose some every now and then just because the Terran army is walking by them and they're going to shoot it because they're not nice people. And we can see my army is chosen to engage, and I just watched a replay where my opponent moved into the third base and kills it. I guess that was a different game. Same map, same spawn locations, so I was a little confused there. I thought that's what he was going to do. But we see this drop did a little bit of damage. Now, obviously I get pylons to scout for these drops, but when they're way out here in this corner, abusing the dead space of the map, there's really nothing you can really do about this, except for leaving units at the base, basically. So that's basically all I have to say about that, but that's just sort of what you gotta deal with. And we can see my sweet building placement has gotten these 2 immortals trapped, but as far as the unit composition that you want to go for, and actually I have a lot of things I want to talk about right now, so let me just pause this for a second. So we got the first 2 Colossus, which is fantastic because we can basically defend any push. It's fantastic, yeah. But the point of these 2 Colossus is basically for 2 things. A, they're just good units. and until your opponent gets Vikings, they're really good units. And B, it forces your opponent to make Vikings. And on the units tab right now, we have 2 Vikings for our opponent, and they will be making more. I guarantee it. Mainly because I just watched this replay. So yeah, it forces your opponent to make Vikings, and the whole idea of getting these 2 first Colossus is, like I said, you can defend pushes, you can catch your opponent off guard if they don't have Vikings, all that great stuff. But once your opponent sees Colossus, especially 2 coming out that soon, or if they scan your base and they see double Robo Bay, they're going to be overproducing Vikings, and that's actually exactly what you want them to do, because what I do with this build, and what I would suggest you do, is make your first 2 Colossus. You can even make 4 if you want, and get Thermal Lance. I don't necessarily say no to that, because that way you can do a pretty big push if you wanted to, around the mid-game, and probably take out their 3rd. But after you make your first 2 Colossus, just go strictly into Immortal production. Immortals are actually extremely underrated in this matchup, I would say. And I could go on for quite some time about why I like Immortals so much, but I'll spare you the speech. But basically, Immortals are really good. Obviously, they are a hard counter to Immortals, not Immortals, to Marauders. But also, Immortal Sentry Stalker is extremely strong, especially when you get your opponent to overproduce on Vikings. So we will get to see that unit competition play out. All I have to say though is just make sure you make Immortals when you can afford them, because you want basically as many as you can get. If you can not make Stalkers, like if you have like 500 minerals and 200 gas, instead of making 4 Stalkers, make 2 Immortals. So yeah, that's all I gotta say about that. And one other thing, when you do get your 3rd base going, the one weakness of the build is that your upgrades will be late. We can see my opponent is starting 2-2. We have not even gotten a Forge completed yet. But when you do start making your 3rd base, when you can afford it, add on your 2 Forge and your Twilight Council. But yet the one weakness of this build is that you have bad upgrades. So if you basically you could lose with this build if you're very passive, if you're constantly defending and you're just not attacking basically, because the strong suit of this build is the composition. But if your opponent has better upgrades and they get to like 3-3 and they get all the units they want, you have to sort of like give yourself some time to get your own 3-3 and all your tech up that you want as well. So all I gotta say is just attack if you have the units that you want. So we'll see. Well, I'll elaborate on that in a little bit. I was kind of vague right there. But yeah, when I get this double Forge, I'll just get Twilight, because obviously you need Twilight to get more upgrades. But also getting Charge or Blink, whatever you prefer, is also a very good upgrade to have. And so let's go ahead and see what happens here. We can see right now, Units tab, I have 5 Immortals on the field right now. My opponent still only has 2 Vikings, so you can obviously see he hasn't overproduced quite yet. A little bit of a face-to-face time right now for our 2 armies. We both actually back off, and my probe is just chilling here. So like right now is when I would say send in some Zealots, or if he starts to push across the map, then send him some Zealots, you know, because they'll be cost effective and they'll throw them off a little bit, and it's just very effective harassment, especially if you have a lot of minerals and not a lot of gas, which right now we see is the opposite from the truth. But one thing I would actually recommend doing, and you don't really need to worry about this when you're on 3 bases, but once you get a little bit later into the game, adding on a Templar Archives purely to get Archons is actually a good decision, unless your opponent is going Ghost heavy. And I will discuss the Ghost because that is actually the hard counter to this unit composition that we see, Immortal, Stalker, Sentry. And for that reason, I would say don't get High Templar, because once your opponent sees the High Templar tech, they're gonna think to get Ghosts, and that would you're gonna have a bad time. All right. We actually see 4 Sentries chilling out in my natural, and you might be looking at this and think this is the worst unit to get to defend a drop. The reason I actually have these here is because if you have excess gas, or basically if you can afford to get a couple Sentries, and you don't need them in your army. Like right now I have, what is that, 6 sentries in my army. You really don't need any more than that in your army at any one time. So what I would advise doing is actually keeping a couple back just so they can get energy. You can do the same thing with High Templar. Obviously I just said don't use them in this build, but in a different build you can do the same sort of thing. It is legitimate strategy. You know, it's something I would actually advise you to do, just so they can gain some energy, and so you can use, you know, have a bunch of sentry ready to go if you were to lose these. So right now we see I'm moving into his third base, which obviously I knew was there, and he's way over here. I don't know why he's over here, to be honest, but whatever. So let's go ahead and just watch this real quick. We see I have 5 immortals in this army with the first 2 colossus as well. A ton of stalkers. Again, I would recommend getting more immortals and stalkers if you can afford, or basically if you can use the chrono boost to make the immortals off the 2 robo. And on the unit stat, before this really gets underway, we can see that he has 9 Vikings, and that is simply too many for 2 colossus. And by the way, I never got thermal lance, and that's an upgrade I would not recommend getting until later in the game. And actually, we can see it's on the way right now, but I'll discuss that in a second. So let's just go ahead and watch this fight. You can see he's using this great sort of dead space area for his Vikings to sort of hover and kill the colossus. Basically, what your micro basically just worry about force shields and guardian shields. Make sure you have a guardian shield up, and make sure your force shields are constantly trying to cut his army in pieces. Obviously, the more units that he has not shooting, the better. But at the same time, don't get too aggressive with the force shields, because the only way you're going to lose this sort of battle is if your forces are bad. Like if they're behind his army, or if they're just were too late or something, and you can stim up and run up to your army. That's the only way you're going to lose that sort of fight. And right now, we can see I did kill his third base, and yeah, I did. So right now, it's looking great, okay? You've killed his third, you've got your own third well secured and established. You could even look to take a 4th base right now if you wanted to. So let me pause this right now, because it does look like I'm adding on a bunch of stuff. So a lot of times in this build, the main focus really is either denying a 3rd base or killing his 3rd base, simply because your unit composition is going to be far superior than what he has on the field, especially if he's overproduced Vikings. And so if you do successfully attack into the 3rd, there are 2 things you can do that will actually potentially cost you the game. After that sort of a battle, one mistake, which is very common, is to continue attacking. Even if he's pulled workers, even if you're getting worker kills, because he's obviously pulled the workers to fight, attacking into his army is very bad. And the reason for that is because Protoss units are expensive, and they take a while to make. Yes, you have warp gates, but the cooldown on these are, you know, a decent amount of time, which I won't tell me what they are right now, the build time anyway. But but my point is, if you lose your army, what the heck? I don't know. Whatever. Okay, it just says the cooldown. I don't even know that. I did not realize that. But so yeah, if you lose your army, which we'll actually get to see now, because I made a very bad. This is pretty bad, but essentially, if you kill his 3rd or you deny his 3rd, you can just fall back. You don't really need to worry about containing him. And like I said, force shields are the most important part. I was out of energy because I only had 2 sentries. So not only is my army completely overwhelmed, but I don't have any force shields to sort of give support.